This one is going to be quite interesting. You've seen this case in Dark Rock Elite, you've seen this case in Pure Loop 2, and finally we have a dedicated review just for this. And even though you might have seen all the benchmarks in those two videos, it's not going to be the same when I compare all the details in this one. So stay tuned, because this is BeQuiet Dark Base 701, and this case, believe me, is outstanding. Not saying this because I have loads of products from BeQuiet, working with them regularly and stuff like that. This case is well ventilated. It has dampening pad on the rear panel just in case to absorb a bit of the sound coming from the chassis. Nice tempered glass, nice design, well thought through case, and you'll just simply love it. It's simple as that. So, when we start discussing the case, we go through the front, top, back, bottom, rear, everything. This case comes with 3 Silent Wings for 140mm fans. They're positioned quite, I would say, quite precisely. The front fan is right in the middle, the top fan is right here at the end, and the rear fan, well, the only one location that does it have, but regardless of that, it creates a quite nice airflow through the chassis, especially if you're using an air cooler, and Dark Rock Elite proved that because the thermals were outstanding and everything else. Now you can go with 3 140mm fans on front, 3 140 on top, and at the rear you could go either with 1 120 or 1 140. The bottom is also possible to mount 140 or 120, and that's beneath the power supply shroud. So it kind of creates additional intake from the bottom of the PSU shroud. When we're talking about radiators, you also have loads of combinations. Unfortunately, no 420 support, which is quite a shame for a nice case as this. 360 maximum on front, 360 maximum on top, and eventually you could go with 120 at the rear, but with two 360s, there is literally no point. When we're talking about graphic card supports, you could go with 430mm of length, which is outstanding. You have 3.5-inch hard drive slots, maximum is 5 if you desire to upgrade. Scope of delivery for 2.5-inch is 2, and you can upgrade to 3. Maximum CPU cooler height 185 millimeters. I/O panel, we have USB 3.2 generation 2 type C, 2 USB 3.2 type A, HD audio for microphone and audio jack, and something interesting happens on the front. It's not like a Dark Base 901, which you have a nice like touch panel where you could slide and adjust the fan speeds or RGB. You have a button, but regardless of the button, you can click 3 times and adjust the fan speeds, you can adjust the RGB lights, and that is really cool. There is no QI charger on this one compared to 901, but honestly, this case is a completely different segment than to 901. 901 is a total flagship, and this is an outstanding case for everybody. In terms if you really like this type of case, of course, but in general. So let's continue with everything. Mounting the front fans or the radiator, you have 2 thumb screws on the front, which you just untie and you just slide out the front panel. The top panel, the top mounting bracket for your radiators and the fans, you have 2 screws right here on front. You just unwind them and pull out the top bracket. One thing that I would like to mention, which happened to me, and it was totally my, let's say, fault, or I didn't pay attention too close. When I was placing the Pure Loop 2 on top, I didn't take into consideration that the rear fan was a bit higher placed. So in one scenario, the radiator did a bit collide with the fan, so I was kind of curious, was it the radiator touching the VRM heatsink, the rams, or maybe even just, I don't know, the wires intercollided or something. I don't know what happened. So finally it was the rear fan that I totally forgot to lower it down a bit, and it actually did go inside, and you have 1 millimeter of clearance with the stock position of the rear fan, so you don't have to worry about that. When we're talking about the clearance for a 360 on top, regardless of the VRM passive heatsink and the rams, for the rams you don't have to worry whatsoever when we take into consideration Pure Loop 2, and for the VRMs you're quite good to go. That covers up all the fans, possibilities, configurations, and everything else. When I did the benchmarks with the Pure Loop 2, I removed the top fan and place it on front above the original position in the middle of the Silent Wings 4. So we have 2 on front, 1 at the rear, and 3 120 on the radiator. So what about the dust filters? On front you have one which is magnetically attached. On top you remove it with the complete top panel, and at the bottom we have a dust filter that is taking out the whole bottom part of the chassis, and you remove it from the front side. Now for the inner part of the chassis, except for the fans and the radiator support, you could go with an E80X motherboard. I think it fits just enough. Now let's check out the power supply shroud. So this is quite interesting because you can remove the front part of the power supply shroud, the top front part, which gives you more space for either for your AIO if you decide to go with a thicker radiator, or a custom loop. It's all up to you to decide. And if you go with a fan, then you have a different cover which is more ventilated, so it kind of redirects the air directly to your GPU. And here's another thing. You can actually press here and remove this panel right here. This is the front side, which gives you more space to mount the fan, of course. Gives you more space to reorganize the cables. And checking it out as it is, this is quite spacious because there's no hard drive cage right here currently. And it's outstanding. So much space, I don't have anything else to say. It's quite easy to remove it. You have 2 parts right here, their indication. Let me just place it right back. Here we go. So 2 indications right here that you have to press, and when you press them you just pull out the part, and that's all there is to it. I mean, the front panel is also very easy to remove. You just pull from the bottom and it all pops out. It doesn't interfere with IO ports on top. It doesn't interfere with the top part. The top part is removable with 2 thumb screws. The side panels, including the tempered glass, also 2 thumb screws. So it's all, I would say, almost toolless. If you don't like to tie up those thumb screws too much, you can do everything with your hands, and it's fairly simple. Next to the motherboard we have 3 covers. One is a smaller one, which kind of makes sense because this is it. The top and the bottom cover are a bit bigger and they go inside some rubber grommets, so they're quite easily, let's say, attached to the case. Here you can mount your hard drives, or you can mount your SSDs and reroute the cables at the back or at the front. It also depends on you, but you'll have to remove those rubber grommets to be able to place those SSDs. The middle one is the one that hides the cables if you desire to place the SSDs right on front to be viewable. At the back we have loads of outstanding canals for your cable management, where you can reroute the EPS cables, 24-pin, or any other cables regarding the addressable RGB, PWM, connections for your IO ports, and everything can nicely be zip tied or Velcro tied, because you do get loads of Velcro ties inside the accessory box, which is outstanding. Now at the back we also have one more quite useful thing, I would say, and this is where it comes to the point of the front IO panel, where you use the adjustment for the fans and for the addressable RGB. We have a controller. We have 8 connections for PWM fans and 2 connections for the addressable RGB. You do need to connect them with SATA power to give the power to all those fans and for the lights. And it is controlled at the top, where you don't have to go to your BIOS or any other software regarding the motherboard software to adjust the lights, except for the motherboard, right? So right on top you have 3 stages for the PWM, and you can also adjust the lights, which these 2 front bars that are illuminated can be adjusted right up from front, and they don't use addressable RGB headers on that controller, so they're already pre-connected, and that's really good because they are not using those 2 ports, right? And you don't have to daisy chain them or do anything towards that. So it's quite straightforward, quite simple. You do have to connect PWM to your motherboard, just in case you decide to control it through that, and the addressable RGB eventually if you desire to, let's say, synchronize it with your motherboard. That's all there is to it. This is an outstanding case, nicely ventilated, with loads of possibilities when we're talking about configuration, and I think it's time to deep dive into benchmarks. So what I mentioned in the beginning of the Dark Rock Elite video, I used AMD Ryzen 7 Pro 7745. and I used it inside this case. So what we got there was 76 degrees in AIDA 64 Extreme Edition. We have 5150 megahertz clock speed, and the GPU went up to 60 degrees. In Cinebench R23, 68 degrees throughout the whole test, 4925 megahertz throughout the whole test, and the benchmarks were around 18,000, I would say. It didn't go below, it was just around 18,000 and 30 Cinebench points, which is great. Now, let's check out this 7900 X3D. The thermals in AIDA 64, 68 degrees Celsius, clock speed 4750 MHz, GPU went up to 62 degrees. Cinebench, it started at 63, but it continued at 66 throughout the next 9 tests, and throughout the whole benchmarks, 4700 MHz clock speed. The scores with the Dark Rock Elite inside this case and the fan configuration that I mentioned, 25,984. This was the first benchmark, but then it kind of not regulated, but it went around 25,800. And then we go with the PureLoop 2 360 AIO cooling down the 7900 X3D. So comparing Dark Rock Elite with PureLoop 2 inside this case, AIDA 64, 66 with the AIO, 68 with the tower cooler. The same clock speed, the GPU is the same. So this GPU, this is Gainward RTX 4070 Phoenix GS, and it hovered around 60 to 62 degrees inside this configuration. It's quite outstanding because I had cases that it went up to 70. So this is quite good. And now in Cinebench points, PureLoop 2 cooling down the AMD Ryzen 9 7900 X3D. We had 64 degrees on the CPU, which I mentioned in that video. It was a shock. 4700 MHz clock speed. And the Cinebench points were right above the Dark Rock Elite by 180 to 200 Cinebench points, which comes to a point that the PureLoop 2 does outperform the Dark Rock Elite, but also both of those coolers perform outstandingly inside this case. I think anything that you place inside this case will perform quite nicely because of the ventilation and everything all together. So I would say big thumbs up to BeQuiet again for another chassis case that is well thought through and placed together with quite nice elegant design. Don't get me wrong, it has nice RGB. This is the point where I say this is the RGB that we need. This is the amount of RGB that we need. Nothing too much, quite nicely placed and regulated. You can turn it off if you don't like it. You can place it back on in a static color. It still looks great. And the same thing goes for the AIO. The same thing goes for the Dark Rock Elite. So what is BeQuiet doing with visual aspects? Let's go into that segment quite quickly. Is they are producing minimalistic design products, which they are, and not in a negative sense, but they are still placing a dash of RGB, which is quite acceptable, I think, for most of 90% of the PC builders. So yeah, there's that. The performance is outstanding, and I mean, there's going to be another BeQuiet product with PC Crazy badge, and this is definitely deserving a PC Crazy performance and PC Crazy approved badge, because of everything that I did mention in this video. So guys, hopefully you like this a bit of a extensive video. I hope it gives you more insights inside the BeQuiet Dark Base 701 case, and that'll be all for today. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, click the notification bell, because it does keep the channel growing and everything all together. And if you liked any of these products that I mentioned so far in this video, check out the description below. I'll place the links for the Dark Rock Elite, PureLoop 2, and of course Dark Base 701, which is the star of today's show. And that'll be all for today, guys. Thank you for watching. See you quite soon. Bye bye.